All right, guys, welcome back. This is section 4.2. We're continuing our talk about malware. So the biggest kind of frontline defense against all the different kinds of malware is antivirus. Okay. Now, antivirus sounds like it might just protect you from viruses, but no, it really should be called, in the 21st century, anti-malware, because it's designed to block all the different kinds of malware, not just viruses. Now, the way it works is, the way antivirus works is with this really fancy mathematical process called hashing. And we're going to talk more about hashing when we talk about digital forensics. But here's the kind of short version, spoiler alert, talk on hashing. Excuse me. Hashing, basically, you take any length of an input. It can be one letter all the way up to the entire Library of Congress. You send it through a mathematical process that you need a PhD in math to understand, and you get an output. Now, for most hashing algorithms, that output is, 25, 32 characters long, letters and numbers. And every time you put the same input through that mathematical process, you get the exact same output. Okay? Now, what this means is how your antivirus works. Whatever group makes your antivirus. So say it's Norton or Symantec or Microsoft Security Essentials or whatever. That group will send a list of these hashes, these 25 to 32, whatever character long letters and numbers, strings of letters and numbers, for known software malware. And you save those on your computer. So somewhere your antivirus has this giant long list of all these different hash numbers. Then, every time your computer tries to download a file or download a new video game or an MP3 or a picture from a website, whatever, it hashes the ones and zeros that make up that program and checks to see whether any of those hash values are in its list. If it is in the list, it'll say, hey, this is probably a virus, might not want to download that, might not want to, go to this website, might not want to download this program, all those other things. But that means that it's only, your antivirus can only protect you from the malware that it knows about. It can only protect you from the definitions, from the hashes that you have given it in its list. That is why you need to update your antivirus regularly, at least bare minimum once a week. Bare minimum once a week. If you can set your antivirus to update its definitions and hash lists once a day, I recommend doing that. But bare minimum once a week. There's also a problem of these antivirus companies. They will define different pieces of malware as different things, right? So one company might call something a virus, while another company calls it ransomware, while another company calls it a worm, while another company calls it this, calls it that. Again, there's a lot of overlap in these different kinds of malware, and different antivirus companies will define them in different ways. And that means if you ask Symantec how many new viruses there were last year, they're going to give you a different answer than Norton, who's going to give you a different answer than Microsoft, who's going to give you a different answer than Kaspersky. All these different companies are going to define these different pieces of malware in different ways and thus tell you different things about what's out there and what's a problem and what category each different thing falls into. Now, one of the things that computer security researchers are kind of anticipating is mobile device malware becoming a bigger deal, right? So at this point, a huge percentage of the population has some kind of antivirus on their computer, their laptop. Companies require all computers in the building or in the organization to have different antivirus. There's lots and lots of focus put on antivirus and protection from malware with desktops and laptops. It's still not good enough, but it's getting better all the time, and it prevents a lot of problems. What we haven't focused on as a kind of a computer using community and as an internet using community is that same kind of protection for our mobile devices. So, as recently as 10, 15 years ago, there were a gazillion types of operating systems for mobile devices. There were tons of them, right? Every different cell phone had a different operating system depending on who you bought the cell phone from. Every tablet, every kind of mobile device had a different operating system from everybody else. So there were tons of them out there, and nobody had a market share larger than, a few tens of percent. Today, does anybody have a mobile phone or a tablet or any kind of mobile device like those that uses anything except Android or iOS? Anybody? I don't. I have my mobile phone uses Android, my tablet uses iOS, my wife's cell phone uses iOS. That's it. Those are the only two operating systems for 98% of the mobile device community. That means they become much more attractive targets for malware creators. So soon, a lot of security researchers believe that malware for those mobile devices is going to start going up and going up and going up, because lots of people don't think about antivirus on their tablet. Lots of people don't think about having antivirus on their cell phone. But they're essentially mini computers. They're just as susceptible to viruses as your desktop or your laptop. So expect to see those numbers rising in the coming years. Now, why do malware writers create malware? Lots of different motivations. And a lot of these overlap. So just because you have one motivation doesn't mean you have the others, right? So the first is creativity. Just, can I do it? What's the creativity? Also curiosity. They kind of go hand in hand, right? So Stephen Morris, 1988, created the Morris worm. He was just kind of curious and trying to figure out, hey, would this work? What would happen if I did this? And it's doing that kind of creative, curious thing where he's trying to figure out the machine and what software can do and all these things. Another one is revenge, right? Somebody upset you, so you're going to give them some malware or some ransomware, right? I got fired from a company. My boss was a jerk, so I know how to infect their systems with ransomware, and I'm going to create this ransomware and send it to them. The prank, the elk cloner that I talked about in the last subsection, where the kid just created that boot sector virus to display that funny poem, but it ended up spreading out of control. That was just a prank. He wanted to mess with his buddies, and boy did it work. Fame. So among, in that cyber criminal subculture, fame is very important. It's status. It's respect, right? So if you can create a piece of malware that infects a large number of people or a large number of organizations, God forbid, if your malware can make the news, you gain status in that subculture, right? So a lot of people want to do it just to kind of gain status with their hacker brethren or within their hacking group. And then finally, there's income. Ransomware can be incredibly monetarily beneficial, and the use of cryptocurrencies has made this much, much, much more difficult to track and investigate and to eventually catch the person who created that, especially ransomware. But also things like keyloggers can result in lots of good income. Make sense? Okay. Because of that increase in income, there has now become a market for malware, right? So creating malware is a very technologically intensive act. It takes a lot of computer knowledge, a lot of programming knowledge to create your own malware from scratch. So the few people, or the relatively small percentage of people who actually know how to do this, and have the expertise to create high probability of infection malware, have learned that instead of using that malware themselves, they can just create the malware and then sell it to other people. So if you go on the dark web, which I highly recommend you don't do, but theoretically, if you go on the dark web and look around at some of their sales markets, next to drugs and guns and all kinds of horrible things for sale, you also find malware for sale. They will sell you different pieces of ransomware or viruses or whatever, and then you can buy it. If you don't have the technical know-how to buy it, to create it, you can buy it, customize it just a little bit for your particular goal, and then use it for whatever your goal is. And then you're happy because you got your malware, and the malware creator's happy because he got paid. So it's created this really massive underground market for these malware programs, and the newer and fresher they are, the more expensive they can be. Similarly, if somebody has created a botnet, they've either bought or developed their own malware, sent it out, created a botnet, they can rent those out. Okay? So you can say, if somebody's looking to DDoS somebody, but I don't have my own botnet, but I need 100,000 computers to DDoS this company because they really pissed me off, or they stole some money from me, or they upset me somehow. I can go find a botnet master and say, listen, I'll pay you, $100 an hour to use your botnet to DDoS this site. And that has become a marketable income-generating tool for these malware creators, which is really, really, really interesting from both a criminal justice perspective and an economics perspective. So what are the laws against using malware? What are the laws that we look to investigate, prosecute those kind of malwares? In the USA, basically, all computer crimes really come down to the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. This was the really, 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 really big computer crime law. The first version of it was passed in the 80s, but it's been revised and updated and revised and updated a few times since then. And the vast majority of computer crimes are kind of defined, and the punishments are listed in the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. Specifically for malware, you can serve years in prison for using malware if they catch you. In the UK, they have a couple of laws that cover this kind of thing. The Computer Misuse Act of 1990, Police and Justice Act of 2006. They kind of criminalize the creation of malware, the distribution of malware, profiting off of malware, and the penalties also, they vary depending on how big the impact was, but you can serve years in prison in the UK for distributing malware. But the disturbing thing is many countries have none. There are still, to this day, there are countries where there is no law against creating malware, owning malware, distributing malware, profiting off of malware. And that makes enforcement very difficult. For instance, I think in an earlier section I told you the story of the I Love You virus. There was this huge virus in the early 2000s called the I Love You virus. And they caught the kid that created it. He was a 16-year-old Filipino kid. And, excuse me, they went to go try him for the crime, and they realized, oh, there's no law against what he did in the Philippines. So I believe they later passed one, so there is a law against that now. But at the time, there was no law against it at all. So this kid got off scot-free for creating and distributing this really horrible virus. But that is the end of Section 4. See you next time for Section 5.